Well, good morning. Welcome back to the shop and day one of the subframe connectors. Now, before I even think of putting the subframe connectors in, I'm going to put the doors back on the car. Now, why is that important? Because those subframe connectors are going to stiffen the frame wherever I weld them in. And if I have the car incorrectly jacked up, then what'll happen is I'll freeze it in that position, and then when I put the doors back on, they're not going to fit. So what we need to do is put the doors back on, make sure all of my gaps are good, especially with the car jacked up. Now, the car is up in the air. Jack stands are under the rear end, which means under the rear end is holding the back of the car up, which means the car is on its suspension, really on the back. Now on the front, I can't really put the car on suspension unless I put the front wheels up on blocks or something. So what I've done is I've taken the jack stands and I've placed them right underneath the lower A-arms. Now that hopefully, what that will do is that will hold the body exactly where the suspension would. Now again, as I said, the way to really make sure is we put the doors back on, and with the doors are back on the car, we make sure the gaps are right. And then once we know the gaps are right, then we can deal with subframe connectors. Now the great news, before I took the car doors off, that means after I set my gaps, after I sanded and welded and targeted a 3/16 inch gap in the back, what I did is I drilled a couple of location holes into the door bracket and also into the door. So what that allows me to do now is I can place the hinge back, but I can take my drill bit now, because I drilled it to a certain size, so I've got my drill bit there. I can take my drill bit, insert it into the hole, and I can do that on this side. And that now locates my door hinge. So now all I do is I put the bolts in, tighten it down, and this will be very, very close to the original settings. There might be a tweak or two, but hopefully not. And if there is no tweak, then I know I'm on the right path. So like I said, let's screw all these in and let's get these back on the car. Okay, so I took myself out of frame, but what you do is you put just a blanket or something, because when you place the door, the blanket is not only going to stop chipping, but it's also going to kind of give you a bit of that gap, right? Because it's going to hold the door away from the rocker panel, which is what you want. Now, of course, I've just removed the bolts out of here, but you can see the drill holes where I had put in the hinges. So now when I put the door back on and I put the hinges on and I put the bolts in, I can then use the drill bit end, of course I used the same drill bit, in order to align the hinges to where the door was. Again, maybe not perfect, but boy, is it going to be super close, right? It's going to get to the point where, any adjustment will be minimal. But really what this exercise is all about is we have to get the doors back on this car. We have to get the gap the way we want it before we even think about those subframe connectors, because we're going to hopefully lock this chassis in place, and we certainly don't want to lock it in place in the wrong place. So let's get this door on. So the top ones, I've already put the drill bits into the alignment holes. I tightened them up. Now the bottom one went in a lot easier, because with the top one aligned, the bottom one almost aligns itself, right? So screws are the drill bits are in, which are obviously holding the pin positions. We lock this down. And we should have a pretty good gap. Let's take a look. I tell you, 5 minutes of drilling those holes into the hinges and into the door and into the body or the A-pillar saved me, I don't know how long. This quite literally, I put the hinges on, put the drill bits in backwards, which align the holes, and my gap is the way it was when I created it weeks ago. So the alignments work. I've got the body alignment comes straight up here where I exactly want it. We have flush at the bottom. I've got a good reveal at the bottom. I've got a match here. So basically, our door is back the way it was. Now the good news, it is now on jack stand, so I can work underneath it. The rear end is cradled with the jack stand, so of course the rear is on suspension. The front, as I mentioned earlier, the jack stands are on the frame, but they're on the frame right below the spring perch. So it is putting the pressure on the front of the car where it would normally be on suspension anyways, which means the car is in load. So what does that mean? That means if my gaps work on the other side, then we're ready to start installing subframe connectors and freeze the body the way it is. Let's do the other side. Okay, so this door is on. I'm using my left hand to get into the door just to hold it because there are no latches. So the door now is aligned perfectly. I'm going to use the calipers right at the dead center of the C, and I'm going to take a reading. 352 millimeters. Now for those who are Canadian and those are US, 1 millimeter is about a 32nd of an inch. So 2 millimeters is a 16th of an inch. So 4 millimeters is going to be about 2/16, 3/16. Now they're a little bit more, right? So 1 millimeter is actually a bit more than a 32nd. So it's a little bit bigger. So basically, if I can get the 350, that puts me just shy, I think, of a 3/16 gap, which is good. I don't mind having less tolerance in the gaps, but the doors have got to be the same. So now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm just using my thumb to align the doors. Let's zero the calipers. Oh, -2. Zero that again. All right, so the calipers are 0. Just like in the other side, I put it in the C. We open up the gap. 350. So within 1 millimeter of the other side. Now, if there's anything that I've done over the last 18 months that you take to the bank, drill the hinges. Put those locator bolts, once the door is where you want it, drill 2 holes in each of the hinges into the A-pillar and 2 holes in each of the hinges into the door. So when the doors were lying where they were, the hinges went in, I put the drill bits in that were the same size that I used to drill the hole in the first place, bolted it, did the same thing here, and bolted it. And my doors are perfect. Now, basically, that probably saved me hours of fiddling with these doors because, trying to get the door canter correct, trying to get the door up and down correct, trying to get the door in and out correct, takes hours to do. Done, 10 minutes. So, like I said, if there's anything you take to the bank, that's one of them. So here's a quick shot underneath the car, and again, you're going to see some differences now between a regular coupe and fastback and a convertible. So first off, there's the T5 as it's been installed, and there, of course, is that transmission mount. Now, courtesy of Barry over at Joe Daddy's Garage, who had gone through this already, I was able to order the exact parts for this, and it bolted right in and centered right up. So the perfect end of the day was to order that transmission mount. Now, as we come back, you can see that obviously the dual exhaust then disappears underneath what's called a reinforcement plate. Now, that reinforcement plate was designed specifically for the convertible. And what it was designed to do is help with the rigidity of the body because there is no roof. So what they've done is they've added these as well. These are reinforcement plates that weld to the floor, which also then welds to the seat perches. And those seat perches, as you know, weld to the inner rockers and also then to the transmission tunnel. Transmission tunnel has a reinforcement hump that goes across the top of it as well, which adds all to the structure. And then what this does here, this plate, is it ties all that together, and that allows me then to bolt this plate in, which again adds, which then ties the 2 reinforcement sides together as well. And of course, as you can see, it has to be removable because the exhaust system runs up on there, and of course the drive shaft runs through there and everything else as well.
So all of that stuff has to be accounted for, and that's why that plate's got to be removable. Well, welcome to the hard part of doing this. I wish I would have had these a lot sooner in the process. If you are going to go with these and you are starting to restore, order them now. Get this done first, because there's going to be two challenges. I have to weld these in, which means all of that Dynamat that I've put down on the floor is at risk of obviously melting. There's no interior in the car, so I don't have to worry about that. And also, with everything in place, it gets in the way. So basically, I already had to remove the bolts that hold the gas line to the front frame rail on this side because it was in the way. What they want you to do is to take the subframe connector, put it onto the front of the frame, and as far back as possible. So you can see it comes back as far as possible. Then once that's as far back as possible, then the back end here locks into the rear frame rail. Now I know you can't see it too well because of the exhaust, but basically they want me to now take this and drive this up into the frame rail, and this will eventually become flush right to the bottom. This was designed for a convertible. This is a 911-C for convertible, and it's designed to come right up against the bottom of this car once it's installed. Of course, I've got a bit of a gap at the front now, and of course I've got my gap at the back. But basically, once this is all hammered up, this will be flush. Now, as we can see, unfortunately, I was hoping I could put some sort of a bracket on the top of this, right, which would then run over here, and I could then integrate it into the bolts of this center. But these are so far away that anything that I put here, any plate that I put here, is going to simply be able to bend. So really, my thought is to try to get this bar to be connected at the front, at the back, and the middle, right? Because that will stop any center deflection. I'm going to create a flat bracket on top here that I can then weld into this reinforcement plate. Now this plate here is part of the upper seat plate. So this lower reinforcement, I then have the seat perch, which is, as you know, is a reinforcement that goes between the inner rocker and the transmission hump. And then of course the transmission hump itself has a reinforcement plate, which is all then triangulated back with this plate here that I have to weld in, or sorry, bolt in. So basically this is how the structure is. Now in my case, what I'd like to do is get this bar installed and then find a way to weld it here as well. Because once this is in, this doesn't have to come out. I'm looking at it now. I mean, there's nothing in its way. The gas line is here, but the gas line, I mean, worst case scenario, if I had to remove this here, this is just the inspection plate anyway, so this plate, or the protection plate, so I can remove that and get to the gas line, but I'm hoping that's not 20 years away still. So this is the idea. So what do I have to do next? I have to go get my angle grinder, and I've got to take all of my POR 15 off of my frame rails. So I got to clean the area up here. I've marked in the back where the bracket attaches to the rear frame rail, which goes up over the rear end. I'm going to clean all that up, and then I am going to then put this in and going to hammer it in place. And we're going to then see what type of clearances I have along the top here, and whether or not I can get a plate here that allows me to tie this into here. Now, this structure being welded up in here is part of this structure, so I don't know if that's going to add value. I want to see what's going on first, so the only way to do that is to get this in place first and then take a look and see what my options are. Okay, so the rear is on. It's not welded, obviously, but I cleaned off the frame rail with my angle grinder. So that gave me now the ability to put that in place. You can see then it runs along the front. Now I had to remove the fuel line here, but you can see the fuel line, I mean, it's not touching, it's loose, but I loosened it up, but that's not hindering it. So the key is this has got to be down this way enough to keep this bar down, because if you put it any further back, it's going to swing way too back and it's going to actually make contact here. So that's obviously no good. but we've got the rear in, and I got to give Global West suspension credit on this piece. That hammered in with a dead blow hammer, so it's not like it, I had to do anything weird. It bolted right in, so either they're doing a great job of using the right jig to build these up, or we got lucky on our car here and that everything is aligned. So the good news is this bar then travels the entire front of the car, and then of course it ties in up here in the front frame rail. So really, when this is all cleaned up, now as I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to be able to put any kind of a bar or a plate here that is going to be able to extend over here to bolt in, because that will simply bend. What I am thinking though is what we do is we put a plate on top here, and that plate will take up this gap, and then that gap I can then weld to this, which will then take this, weld it there, weld it here, and obviously weld it back there, and then that will stop this entire structure from bending. This on its own is going to give structural rigidity so that that rear doesn't flex this way. And of course, then we don't want the front flexing. And of course, then we get the torsional fix as well, because these are going to grab. I'm not going to get any torsional twist, and hopefully not get any suspension twist as well. So that's it. This one is just, again, in place. I got to clean all of the coating off of the bar first before I think of welding it in. And like I said, I'm gonna see if I can find a steel plate that I can weld onto the top of this, which will allow me to weld it on here, and then this will become a permanent part of the car. It gives me the clearance I need, so I think I'm in good shape. Let's do some cleaning. So as you can see, it actually goes in quite easily. Now they do give instructions. I'll be honest, I looked at them real quickly. They're quite rudimentary, but basically, I mean, there's really no other way they'll go in. Clean the back of the frame rail that goes up over the differential hump, clean the frame rail that is on the front, and as you saw, it slips right in. Very well designed because it does follow the contour of the rear frame rail. They provide gussets so that when you do put it in on the frame rail, if it doesn't meet the frame rail perfectly, you can weld this gusset plate in the back. And again, that allows you not only to box it in, but to seal it so no debris gets in, because when debris gets in, that's when you get moisture, and when you get moisture, you get rot. So the idea is to seal this up, and then of course we'll put the POR 15 back on the whole thing, and then we'll call it a day. Now, I've been really thinking about this. Do I want to put a perch here that when I install it, I'm going to weld it to the reinforcement that goes underneath the floor? And in all honesty, I've been reading up on this, and even though I had grandiose plans about tying this into the center bolt patterns and then realizing that's not going to work, and then welding this to the center frame and realizing maybe that might not be a good idea, I'm probably not. What I'm going to do is just put this in the way it's supposed to go in. It's going to, as I mentioned in an earlier video, we have structure on top. We're going to be putting structure underneath. That's going to tie the two ends together, and that will stop it from being able to move, right? Because you're going to tie the two ends together. So like a girder, right? It has strength on the top and the bottom, and the middle really doesn't have to have anything there. That's why you see I-beams have structure on either end, but really nothing in the center, because there is no load in the center. So basically, we're going to be doing that. I talked about them before. Like I said, this is a company called Global West. Now, Global West is out of California, but I bought these through Jegs. They were like $179 for the pair of them, so really well done. Their jig is obviously accurate because it fits the convertible beautifully. So basically, I'm going to simply have to do a, clean the perimeters on it, weld them in. I'm thinking maybe drill a hole in here. I'm just thinking, and that way there I'd get more meat, more welding on it. I'll think that through. But basically, we clean this up, put the weld through on the frame, hit it, and that'll give me the ability to weld these in. And but that's for another day. It's a beautiful day outside, as you can see through the window, so I'm going out to enjoy the summer. And this will have to wait for a rainy day. So part 2 coming up, where I weld these in. Hope you enjoyed the video. Like I said, if you learned anything, it's to drill those hinges. I tell you, I'm amazing.
But basically, I'll clean this up. I'm gonna clean up under here. I'll get this side in. I'm gonna make sure everything's good. Then I'm gonna use a jack to actually jack these underneath to push them in. Actually, I'm spoiling the next video. I'll see you then.